Hi, I'm John Petty, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Growing Up in Flip-Flops. This episode is entitled Whiskey in a Teacup. I'd like to introduce you to my Aunt Carolyn. My Aunt Carolyn was my sister and my favorite relative. She always gave us the absolute best Christmas presents. I never received a box of handkerchiefs or a selection of socks from her for Christmas. It was always a fantastic toy. She was, even at my young age, probably the most elegant woman that I could imagine. The other identifying characteristic of Aunt Carolyn was she had the most beautiful, lilting Southern accent. There was no twang or anything. It was just elegance in a voice. It was regal. It was distinguished. It was beautiful. She was relatively tall. She had flaming red hair. She was an attractive woman. And importantly to this story, she was the clerk of the circuit court of her county. She was, at least at one point, the longest serving elected official in the state of Tennessee. Everybody that knew her respected her. She was just an absolutely wonderful, wonderful person. Well, the occasion that I had to visit Aunt Carolyn, clearly my mother had driven my sister and I up to visit her. Had just turned 16 and was a newly minted licensed driver. So on one of the mornings while we were visiting, I woke up before my mother and my sister, and I headed downstairs to the kitchen to get a glass of milk or something. When I came into the kitchen, there was Aunt Carolyn seated in her housecoat with a cup of coffee at the kitchen table. Upon seeing me, she said, "Well, good morning, darling. Won't you come over here and sit down beside me?" It was a small kitchen table. She was at one side of it, and I pulled out a chair on another side of the table and sat down. And she looked at me and kind of tapped her hand on the table, and she said, "Darling, why don't you just come over here closer to me?" Well, I was probably about 2 feet from her at that point. And I said, "Aunt Carolyn, I'm fine here." And she goes, "No, darling, why don't you just scoot over here to me?" And so I moved my chair probably, 3 or 4 inches. She taps the table again. She goes, "No, darling, come over here closer to me." And I'm sitting here, what the dickens does she want? I'm right here. And we went through this little dance a couple more times until I ended up moving my chair around the corner of the table and was next to her with what I would describe as being knee to knee. I was that close to her, not seated beside her, but facing her knee to knee. Both our knees were touching. When I got into this position, her demeanor completely changed. It was literally a transformation I had never, ever seen from this delightful, elegant Aunt Carolyn. She put down her coffee cup, and out came a finger pointed directly at my face. The tone of her voice was no longer this beautiful, lilting voice, but probably dropped a couple octaves. Finger in my face, she said, "Let's get something straight right now." She said, "You're in my county. I don't care what you do anywhere in the rest of this wide world. But with you driving now, you're in my county. You do not go over the speed limit 1 mile. You do not roll through any stop signs. You come to complete stops. You obey every single traffic law in this county. You can do whatever you want anywhere else, but in my county, you're obeying the law. I had never heard anything like this before. And I'm sitting there wide eyed, and I'm, yes, Aunt Carolyn, yes, Aunt Carolyn. And she continued, I am not going to have you come before one of my judges and have a judge turn to me and look at me and say, Carolyn, is this one of your relatives? That is not going to happen. Do you understand me? Yes, Aunt Carolyn, yes. You don't have to worry about anything. It's fine. I understand. I understand perfectly. And with that, her voice completely changed. She then patted me on one of my thigh just above my knee, and she goes, Good, darling. What can I fix you for breakfast? I titled this Whiskey in a Teacup. That's a Southern phrase that refers to a woman that is delicate, proper, and perceived as soft from the outside. But on the inside of that teacup, there is strength and fire and a will. I think my Aunt Carolyn personified the entire idea of whiskey in a teacup. And I have never forgotten that lesson she gave me. And trust me, in that county to this day, when I'm visiting there, every single traffic law is obeyed, because I know if I show up in a court there, somebody's going to ask, Are you one of Carolyn's relatives? Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode.